We are literally standing on the razor's edge of what could become the single most catastrophic geopolitical crisis of the 21st century. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you that decisions being made right now in the White House Situation Room and in secret command bunkers deep beneath Tehran could determine whether your children grow up in a world at peace or a world engulfed in a conflict that makes the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan look like minor regional skirmishes. President Donald Trump just issued an ultimatum to Iran that has sent absolute shockwaves through every intelligence agency, every military command center, every foreign ministry, and every financial capital across the entire globe. His exact words, and I need you to understand the weight of what he said, were no deal without surrender. Not negotiation, not compromise, not diplomatic give and take. Surrender. Complete, total, unconditional capitulation to American demands or face the full devastating power of the United States military machine unleashed on Iranian territory. Those 4 words have fundamentally changed the entire calculus of Middle Eastern geopolitics because everyone who understands anything about Iranian political culture, about the history of the Islamic Republic, about the way authoritarian regimes maintain legitimacy, knows that what Trump is demanding is literally impossible for Tehran to accept. Before I break down exactly what's happening right now behind closed doors at the Pentagon, inside Iranian command bunkers, and in the corridors of power in Moscow and Beijing, I need you to do something critical for me. Smash that subscribe button right now, and I mean right now, because YouTube is actively suppressing channels that report honestly on geopolitical crises like this one. The algorithm is burying content that contradicts the sanitized narrative you get from mainstream media, and your subscription is literally the only way this information reaches people before it's too late. And I'm going to be completely transparent with you. Channels like mine get demonetized, shadow banned, and sometimes completely deleted for exposing uncomfortable truths about what's really happening in global conflicts. So if you want to keep getting information that isn't filtered through corporate media bias and government talking points, you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now drop a comment immediately telling me where you're watching from, because what's about to unfold in the Middle East will affect every single person on this planet, regardless of what country you live in. And I want to know how many of you are in zones that could be directly impacted by what's coming. Here's what absolutely nobody in the establishment media is telling you about Trump's ultimatum. And this is information that I'm getting from multiple sources inside the defense and intelligence community who are so alarmed by what they're seeing that they're willing to risk their careers to get this information out to the public. At the exact same moment that Trump's surrender demand was being transmitted to Tehran through diplomatic backchannels, the Pentagon activated what insiders are calling the most aggressive and comprehensive military repositioning in the Middle East since the build-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We're not talking about routine readiness adjustments. We're not talking about precautionary measures. We're talking about full-scale war preparation at the highest level of intensity, short of actual combat operations already underway. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, which includes not just the carrier itself, but multiple guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and a nuclear attack submarine, has been redirected at maximum speed toward the Persian Gulf. That's $11 billion worth of naval power carrying approximately 90 aircraft and over 6,000 personnel moving into position for potential strike operations. But it gets worse, so much worse. B-52 Stratofortress strategic bombers, the same aircraft that have been the backbone of American long-range strike capability since the Cold War, have been deployed to forward bases in the region and placed on what's called strip alert status. Do you know what strip alert means? It means these aircraft are fueled, armed, and ready to launch with full weapons loads in under 15 minutes from the moment they receive the order. 15 minutes from peace to war. That's how close we are right now. And these aren't carrying conventional weapons exclusively. Intelligence sources are confirming that bunker buster munitions specifically designed to destroy hardened underground facilities, the kind of facilities where Iran keeps its nuclear research and missile production capabilities, have been pre-positioned and loaded. Special operations forces, the elite units that conduct the most sensitive and dangerous missions, are being moved into forward staging areas in undisclosed locations throughout the region. We're talking about SEAL teams, Delta Force operators, Special Forces groups, all being positioned for potential direct action operations inside Iranian territory. And here's the piece that should absolutely terrify you, because it reveals just how seriously the Pentagon is taking the possibility of imminent conflict. Contingency planning protocols that are only activated when military action transitions from possible to probable have been implemented. These are the same operational frameworks that were used in the 72 hours before the invasion of Iraq. Planning cells composed of hundreds of military analysts, intelligence officers, and operational commanders have been working literally around the clock for the past week on comprehensive strike packages, target lists prioritized by strategic value, and operational timelines that map out hour-by-hour sequences for potential military action. This level of detailed planning doesn't happen for hypothetical scenarios. This happens when civilian leadership has made the decision that military force is going to be necessary, and the only question is timing and scope. Multiple sources inside the Department of Defense are telling me that there are essentially 3 operational plans on the table right now, and I'm going to break down each one so you understand exactly what we're potentially facing. Option 1 is what they're calling limited precision strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities and ballistic missile production sites. The theory behind this option is that you can set back Iran's nuclear program by 5 to 10 years, degrade their missile capabilities, and send a message about American resolve without triggering full-scale regional war. But here's the problem with that theory, and every military analyst who's being honest about this will tell you the same thing. Iran will retaliate. Period. They're not going to absorb American airstrikes and just accept it. They're going to launch counterattacks against American forces in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. They're going to activate Hezbollah in Lebanon to launch rockets at Israeli cities. They're going to attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes every single day. And once that retaliatory cycle starts, once American service members are dying in Iranian counterattacks, the political pressure to escalate becomes overwhelming. Option 2 is much more extensive and involves sustained air and missile campaigns designed to completely destroy Iran's military infrastructure, command and control systems, air defense networks, naval capabilities, and Revolutionary Guard facilities. We're talking about potentially thousands of strike sorties over weeks or months, systematically dismantling Iran's ability to project power throughout the region. The scale of this option would dwarf anything we did in Iraq or Libya. But even this massive application of air power doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is that you can bomb Iran from the sky for months, and you still don't control what happens on the ground. Iran has spent 4 decades preparing for asymmetric warfare against a technologically superior opponent. They've dispersed critical assets to hardened bunkers. They've created redundant command structures. They've built domestic missile production capabilities that can't be completely eliminated from the air. And most critically, they have proxy forces throughout the entire region that can conduct retaliatory operations, even if Iran's conventional military is devastated. Option 3 is the one that keeps senior Pentagon leadership awake at night, because it's the one that some hawks in the administration are reportedly pushing for, and it involves not just airstrikes, but actual ground operations to achieve regime change in Tehran. This would require a massive invasion force, potentially hundreds of thousands of American troops, fighting through some of the most difficult terrain on Earth against a population of 85 million people who would be defending their homeland. And here's what makes this option completely insane from a military planning perspective. Iran is not Iraq. Iraq in 2003 was a degraded military power that had been under sanctions and no-fly zones for over a decade. Iran is a functioning regional power with a large, relatively well-equipped military, battle-hardened forces that have been fighting in Syria for years, and most importantly, strategic depth that allows them to absorb enormous punishment and keep fighting. Military analysts who've war-gamed a ground invasion of Iran come back with casualty estimates that would make the American public recoil in horror. We're talking about potentially tens of thousands of American dead and wounded. We're talking about a conflict that could easily last a decade or more. We're talking about costs that would run into the multiple trillions of dollars and devastate the American economy. So those are the three options that are reportedly on the table, and here's the terrifying reality. Trump's ultimatum demanding complete surrender has essentially eliminated any possibility of a negotiated solution that would make military action unnecessary. Think about this logically from Tehran's perspective. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has built his entire political legitimacy over 4 decades on resistance to American pressure and defense of Iranian sovereignty and independence. His credibility with the Revolutionary Guard, with the hardline elements of the regime, with the Iranian public that supports the system, all of it depends on him not being seen as capitulating to foreign demands. If he surrenders to Trump's ultimatum, he's finished politically. The regime would likely collapse from internal contradictions as hardliners revolt against what they would see as betrayal of the revolution's core principles. So from Khamenei's perspective, surrender equals death of the regime. But military confrontation with the United States also potentially equals death of the regime. So he's being forced to choose between 2 scenarios that both end with his government's destruction, which means he has every incentive to fight, to make the cost of American military action so high that Washington backs down, or to create international incidents that fracture American alliances and make sustained military operations politically impossible. And this is where the situation becomes exponentially more dangerous, because we're not just talking about a bilateral confrontation between the United States and Iran. We're talking about a regional crisis that could draw in multiple other powers and potentially spiral into something much larger and more catastrophic. Israel is watching this situation with extreme concern because they know that the moment American strikes hit Iranian territory, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is essentially an Iranian proxy force, will launch rocket attacks on Israeli cities. Hezbollah has an estimated arsenal of over 150,000 rockets and missiles, many of them precision-guided and capable of hitting specific targets in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. If Israeli cities start getting hit, Israel will retaliate not just against Hezbollah in Lebanon, but potentially against Iranian targets directly. And suddenly, you have a multi-front war involving the United States, Iran, Israel, Hezbollah, and potentially other actors. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are also deeply concerned, but for different reasons. Yes, they want to see Iranian influence in the region diminished. They've been competing with Tehran for regional dominance for decades. But they're also acutely aware that their oil infrastructure, their desalination plants, their economic centers are all within range of Iranian missiles and drones. We saw what happened in 2019 when Iranian drones attacked Saudi oil facilities at Abqaiq and Khurais, temporarily taking out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production capacity. That was a demonstration of capability, a warning shot. In an actual war scenario, Iran would target every major oil facility, every port, every economic asset they could reach in Saudi territory and Emirati territory. And the Gulf Arab states know that their entire economic model depends on being able to export oil safely and maintain stability. A regional war would devastate their economies, even if they're not directly involved in the fighting. And then there's the elephant in the room that almost nobody in American media wants to talk about honestly, which is the role of Russia and China in all of this. Iran is a strategic partner for both Moscow and Beijing. For Russia, Iran is a critical ally in Syria, a major arms customer, and a partner in resisting American dominance in the Middle East. For China, Iran is a crucial source of oil and a key node in the Belt and Road Initiative that's supposed to connect Chinese economic power across Eurasia. Both Russia and China have invested heavily in Iran, both economically and politically, and neither of them wants to see the Islamic Republic destroyed or replaced with an American-aligned government. Intelligence reporting suggests that Iran has been in quiet discussions with both Moscow and Beijing about security guarantees, about what kind of support they might receive if confronted with American military action. Now, nobody thinks Russia or China is going to directly fight the United States over Iran. That would be insane and risk nuclear escalation. But there are a lot of things they can do, short of direct military confrontation, that would make an American war with Iran infinitely more complicated and costly. Russia could provide Iran with advanced air defense systems that would make American air operations much more dangerous and lead to aircraft losses and pilot casualties that would shock the American public. China could provide intelligence support, satellite imagery, electronic warfare assistance, all things that don't constitute direct intervention, but that significantly improve Iran's ability to resist American military pressure. Both countries could provide diplomatic cover at the United Nations, preventing any international legitimacy for American military action and potentially organizing economic countermeasures that would punish the United States financially for unilateral military aggression. And perhaps most significantly, both Russia and China could use an American war with Iran as an opportunity to advance their own strategic interests in other regions, while American attention and resources are focused on the Middle East. Russia could become more aggressive in Ukraine or Eastern Europe. China could increase pressure on Taiwan or in the South China Sea. Suddenly, America is facing multiple simultaneous crises and doesn't have the bandwidth or resources to address all of them effectively. Now let's talk about what all of this means for you personally, because I know some of you are watching this and thinking, okay, this is concerning from a geopolitical perspective, but how does it actually affect my daily life? Let me spell it out for you in terms that are impossible to ignore. The moment that the Strait of Hormuz is threatened or closed, which will happen within hours of military conflict beginning, global oil markets will panic. Oil prices will spike immediately, and I'm not talking about a gradual increase of a few cents per week. I'm talking about jumps of 20, 30, 40% overnight. Gas prices in the United States will go from an average of $3 per gallon to $5, $6, potentially $7 per gallon within a week. And that's just the beginning, because oil prices affect everything else in the economy. Shipping costs explode because trucks, trains, and container ships all run on fuel. When shipping costs quadruple, the price of everything that gets shipped, which is literally everything you buy, increases proportionally. Food prices will surge because modern agriculture is incredibly energy-intensive and dependent on global supply chains. The fertilizer that grows your food is made from natural gas. The tractors that plant and harvest crops run on diesel. The trucks that transport food from farms to processing facilities to distribution centers to grocery stores all run on fuel that just became 2 or 3 times more expensive. Within a month of a major oil shock, you're looking at food price increases of 25 to 50% on basic staples, and it's not just food. Electronics prices will skyrocket because the global supply chains that produce smartphones, computers, and televisions all depend on cheap, reliable shipping. Clothing prices will jump because most textiles are manufactured in Asia and shipped across oceans. Medicine prices will increase because pharmaceutical supply chains are global and incredibly complex. Literally everything in your life becomes more expensive almost overnight. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck, which describes the majority of Americans, this kind of sudden inflation is devastating. But the economic pain goes beyond just higher prices at the pump in the grocery store. Financial markets hate uncertainty. And they especially hate geopolitical crises that threaten global oil supplies and economic stability. The moment American missiles start hitting Iranian targets, stock markets around the world will crash. We're talking about potential drops of 20, 30, even 40% in major indices within the first few weeks of conflict. If you have a 401k or retirement account that's invested in the stock market, you just watched a huge chunk of your retirement savings evaporate. If you're a business owner who depends on access to credit, suddenly banks are tightening lending standards because they're worried about economic recession, and you can't get the capital you need to operate. If you're employed in an industry that's sensitive to energy costs or economic downturns, you're suddenly facing potential layoffs as companies cut costs to survive the crisis. And here's something that almost nobody is talking about, but that you need to understand. A major war with Iran would be incredibly expensive for the United States government, easily costing trillions of dollars over the course of the conflict. Where does that money come from? It comes from deficit spending, which means the government has to borrow it, which means national debt explodes, which means eventually either taxes have to go up dramatically or spending on domestic programs has to be cut drastically, or both. Social security, Medicare, infrastructure spending, education funding, all of it becomes vulnerable when you're spending trillions of dollars on a Middle Eastern war. And the burden of that spending falls disproportionately on younger generations who will be paying off war debt for decades after the conflict ends. Then there's the human cost, which is somehow always minimized in discussions about potential military action until American casualties start coming home in flag-draped coffins. A war with Iran would not be quick or easy or relatively bloodless, like some of the advocates seem to suggest. Iran has capabilities that Iraq never possessed. They have advanced missile systems that can hit American bases with precision. We're talking about potentially hundreds of American service members killed in the first few days of conflict as Iranian missiles rain down on bases in Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. They have proxy forces throughout the region that can conduct attacks on American personnel and facilities. They have cyber warfare capabilities that have already been demonstrated against American targets, and that could potentially disrupt critical infrastructure inside the United States itself. Imagine waking up one morning to find that Iranian hackers have penetrated electrical grid control systems and entire regions of the country are without power, or that water treatment facilities have been compromised and cities are being told to boil water, or that financial systems have been attacked and you can't access your bank account or use credit cards. These aren't hypothetical scenarios from science fiction movies. These are actual capabilities that Iran has developed specifically for asymmetric warfare against a technologically superior opponent, and they would absolutely use them if facing an existential threat from American military action. And once you start down that road of cyber attacks affecting civilian infrastructure, you're in completely uncharted territory in terms of how the conflict escalates and where the boundaries are. If Iranian cyber attacks cause deaths of American civilians through infrastructure failures, does that justify American strikes on Iranian civilian infrastructure? And if America starts targeting Iranian civilian infrastructure, how does that affect international support and domestic political will to continue the conflict? You can see how quickly this spirals into scenarios that nobody actually wants, but that become inevitable once you cross certain red lines. There's also the very real possibility of terrorism, and I want to be clear that I'm not fear-mongering here. I'm talking about actual assessed threats that intelligence agencies are warning about. Iran has relationships with various militant groups around the world. And in a scenario where the Islamic Republic is facing destruction from American military action, there's every reason to believe they would activate sleeper cells and direct attacks against American targets globally. We could see attacks on American embassies, American businesses operating overseas, potentially even targets inside the United States itself. This isn't speculation. This is based on Iran's demonstrated history of using proxy forces to conduct attacks when they can't respond conventionally. The 1983 Beirut barracks bombing that killed 241 American service members, the Khobar Towers bombing in 1996, attacks on Israeli and Jewish targets in Argentina in the 1990s, all of these have been linked to Iranian sponsorship or support. So when you're evaluating whether Trump's ultimatum demanding Iranian surrender is wise policy, you have to weigh all of these factors. You have to consider not just whether American military power can destroy Iranian military capabilities, which it absolutely can, but whether the cost of doing so in terms of American lives, economic damage, global instability, potential escalation involving other major powers, and long-term commitment of resources is worth whatever objectives we're trying to achieve. And this is where honest people can disagree about the right approach. But what's not acceptable is pretending that military action would be quick, easy, and relatively painless. That's a fantasy that has been disproven in every major American military intervention over the past 30 years. So what's the timeline here? How long do we have before this situation reaches a point of no return? Intelligence analysts and military planners that I've spoken with suggest we're looking at a window of approximately 30 to 60 days before the crisis reaches a breaking point. The military assets that are being moved into position need time to be fully operational and coordinated. Diplomatic channels, even though everyone knows they're unlikely to produce results, need to be exhausted so that the administration can claim they tried everything before resorting to military force. Domestic political preparation needs to occur, which means briefing Congress, preparing the American public through media messaging, building at least some minimal international coalition, even if it's mostly symbolic. All of that takes time, but that window is closing rapidly, and every day that passes without some kind of de-escalation increases the probability that we end up in a shooting war. And here's what makes this situation so dangerous, more dangerous perhaps than any foreign policy crisis since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're creating the exact conditions that have led to catastrophic wars throughout human history. You have two sides that have both drawn red lines and staked their credibility on not backing down. You have leaders on both sides who believe that showing weakness would be politically fatal. You have military forces in close proximity with rules of engagement that could lead to incidents spiraling out of control. You have domestic political pressures on both sides that reward aggressive posturing and punish compromise. And you have a fundamental lack of trust and communication that makes miscalculation incredibly likely. This is how World War I started. This is how countless regional conflicts have exploded into something much larger, and we're walking right into the same trap while pretending it's impossible because we're too rational or too modern to make those kinds of mistakes. Comment below right now and tell me whether you think military conflict with Iran is inevitable at this point or whether there's still a realistic path to de-escalation. Do you think Trump's surrender ultimatum was strategic brilliance that will force Iran to cave? Or do you think it was a catastrophic mistake that's backed both sides into a corner where war becomes unavoidable? And what do you think the global consequences would be if we actually do go to war? Would Russia and China stay on the sidelines, or would they see this as an opportunity to challenge American power? Share this video with everyone you know because the next few weeks are absolutely critical, and the more people who understand what's really at stake, the harder it becomes for leaders to sleepwalk us into a war that could reshape the entire global order for generations. This is information that affects every single person watching, and you need to stay informed about developments as they happen, because your life, your economic security, your future is going to be directly impacted by decisions being made right now in Washington and Tehran.